My daughter's screaming rang out at the exact moment I saw my own father rifling through the drawers in her bedroom. He had no idea I'd come home. One hand clutched a stack of papers, the other gripped Lily's wrist so tightly she couldn't pull free. "I'm asking you one last time," he growled. "Where does your mother hide the deed to this house?" Lily sobbed, her face gone pale. She was only 9 years old, and the man frightening her so badly she could barely breathe was no burglar. No thief. No stranger. He was her grandfather, my own father, the man I had trusted for 40 years. In that moment, I understood something that turned the blood in my veins to ice. My father hadn't come here to visit his granddaughter. He'd come to steal something, and if Lily knew too much, I wasn't sure he'd stop at just making her cry. I was still in my hospital scrubs. My car keys were still in my hand. I'd just finished a 14-hour shift saving other people's lives. But never in my life, not in the middle of the worst shootings or the most horrific accidents in that emergency room, had I felt fear like I did standing inside my own home. Because for the first time, I was seeing who my father truly was. And the most terrifying part was, I think he'd been hiding it his whole life. Let me back up, because if I don't, none of this will make sense. My name is Dana. I'm 40 years old, and I work as an emergency physician at a trauma center just east of downtown Portland. My whole job is staying calm when other people can't. Car wrecks come through my doors at 2 in the morning. Gunshot wounds, kids who fell off roofs, factory accidents that would make most people faint. I've held a stranger's heart in my hands, and kept my voice level for the family in the waiting room. I am good at this. I am trained for chaos. Nothing trained me for my own living room. I'd gotten off early that day. A colleague offered to cover the back half of my shift because I looked like death, and for once I said yes instead of pushing through. I remember being grateful. I remember thinking I'd surprise my daughter, maybe pick up tacos from the cart on Hawthorne, maybe actually sit at the dinner table like a normal mom. I had no idea the kindness of one coworker was about to crack my entire family open. Her name is Lily. She's 9. She has a gap in her front teeth she's self-conscious about and a stuffed otter named Captain that she's too old for and refuses to give up. When I pushed open my front door that afternoon, the first thing I heard was Lily crying. Not a scraped knee cry. Not a sibling took my toy cry. The kind of crying that comes from a child who has learned, in real time, that adults can be frightening. My body went cold. I have walked toward 100 emergencies without flinching. But there is a specific paralysis that happens when the patient is your own child, and her pain is coming from inside the one place that was supposed to be hers. For 1 second I couldn't move at all. Then the training kicked in. Except it kicked in wrong, because every instinct said run to her and every piece of tactical sense said do not announce yourself yet. You don't know what's in there. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I stayed quiet. I pressed myself against the wall by the coat hooks, in the little shadow where the entryway bends toward the kitchen, and I listened. "Tell me where your mom keeps the deed." That was my father's voice, Gerald. 68 years old, retired electrician, a man who used to carry me on his shoulders at the county fair. "Don't play dumb with me, girl. You've seen the folder, the blue one." "I don't know," Lily sobbed. "I don't know what that is." She's lying. A second voice, from down the hall, from inside my own bedroom. My older sister, Renee, 46, and furious in the specific way she'd been furious for most of my life. "Dana hides everything. She's always got papers and lockboxes and her precious little secrets. Check under the mattress." I heard a drawer hit the floor. That sound did something to me. It rearranged my priorities into a cold, clean list. The same way I triage a trauma bay. Child first. Exit second. Threat assessment third. Evidence last. My hands were already moving before my brain caught up. Phone out. Screen dimmed. Thumb finding the 3 numbers I've watched. Terrified families dial 1,000 times but had never dialed myself. The operator picked up. I cupped my hand around the phone and the side of my mouth and breathed the words so quietly I could barely hear them myself. "My father and sister broke into my house. They're threatening my 9-year-old. I need police. Please don't make me talk loud." She told me to stay on the line. I stayed, and while I crouched there in the shadow of my own coat rack, listening to my child cry and my family tear my bedroom apart, I want to be honest with you about what I was feeling. It wasn't only fear. Underneath the fear there was this old, exhausted grief. Because some part of me had always known it could come to this. I just never let myself say it out loud. If you've ever loved someone who only ever seemed to call when they needed something, if you've ever felt that little drop in your stomach when their name lights up your phone, that bracing for impact feeling, then you already understand a piece of what kept me frozen against that wall. I wasn't just scared of what they'd do. I was grieving the version of them I'd been pretending existed. Here's the part people don't get about families like mine. I had helped them. God, I had helped them so many times. When Gerald said he was about to lose his house to back taxes, I wrote the check. When Renee got divorced and swore she'd pay me back for the lawyer, I covered it, all of it, and never saw a dollar. I paid for a transmission. I paid for a medical emergency that turned out to be a fishing trip to Bend. I once missed Lily's first school concert because my father called me crying, saying the bank was coming for everything, and I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage wiring him money while my daughter looked for me in the audience. Each time, I told myself, that's what love looks like. Each time, what they actually learned was that my guilt had a price tag, and they could read it. But I never signed over the house. I never signed over the share my mother left me in a small apartment building she'd quietly invested in before she passed 8 units in a part of town that had gotten very expensive very fast. I never gave anyone the keys to the trust I'd built for Lily. Those 3 things were the only lines I'd never crossed. And as I crouched there listening, I finally understood that those 3 lines were exactly what they'd come for. They didn't come to ask. They'd waited until my schedule said I'd be at the hospital until evening. They'd come to corner my daughter, take what they could carry, and frighten me into signing the rest. And the cruelest piece of all was that they'd decided a scared 9-year-old was the fastest tool for the job. Listen to me. Gerald's voice dropped lower, and somehow that was worse than the yelling. Your mom is selfish, sweetheart. If she loved this family, she'd help us. If she doesn't sign those papers, a lot of people are going to lose everything. You don't want that, do you? Please stop yelling, Lily whispered. That was the moment something inside me went still. Not calm. Still. The way the whole world goes quiet right before you make the first incision. I'd seen fear turn good people cruel in my waiting room, plenty of times. This wasn't fear. Fear doesn't print out your daughter's mother's work schedule and bring gloves. This was a plan. And I think that's the moment I want you to sit with for a second, because I've thought about it every single day since. There's a difference between someone hurting you because they're drowning and someone hurting you because they've done the math. My family had done the math. They'd looked at a child and decided she was an acceptable cost. I have never hated and pitied 2 people so completely at the same time. Renee came out of my bedroom holding a fistful of paper. I found the apartment agreement, but the transfer certificate's not here. She moved it. She knew. Then we make her sign new ones, Gerald said. Renee laughed, but it was thin and breathless. You really think she's gonna sign after this? She will, he said, if she wants her kid to stop crying. The operator's voice came through my phone, soft as a feather. Officers are en route. Are you safe? Not yet, I breathed. And then I stood up. I want to tell you I had a brilliant plan. I didn't. I just couldn't stay in that shadow one more second while my daughter believed she was alone. I lifted my phone to keep recording. I stepped around the corner, and I walked into my own living room like I was walking into a trauma bay. Slow, steady, hands visible, eyes counting everything. Gerald's hands. Empty. Good. Lily's distance from him. Too close. Not good. Renee's bag on the couch. Open, heavy, with the gleam of my mother's pearls spilling over the top. Lily saw me first. I will never forget her face as long as I live, because it changed about 5 times in 1 second. Terror, then this flash of pure animal hope, then shame, like she thought she'd done something wrong, then a relief so total it nearly knocked me off my feet. She started to get up. Mom? She choked out. Hey baby. My voice came out level. Surgeon level. Come here, walk to me. Gerald spun around. Dana. He said my name like I was the burglar. Like I'd broken into his afternoon. What are you doing home? Lily. Now. Behind me. I kept my eyes on him and held up the phone with my other hand. Don't move toward her. He looked at the phone, then at my face, and I watched something recalculate behind his eyes. Are you recording this? Yes. Renee appeared in the bedroom doorway, my mother's necklace in one hand, my property folder in the other, her face twisted. You're recording your own family? What is wrong with you? No, I said, and I felt my voice find its center. I'm recording 2 adults who broke into my house, took my mother's jewelry, terrified my child, and went looking for documents they have no legal right to touch. The room went quiet. Lily reached me. Her hands grabbed 2 fistfuls of my scrubs and held on so hard her knuckles went white. And I felt her whole body trembling against the back of my leg. And here's the thing I need you to understand about that exact moment, because it's the hinge the entire rest of my life turned on. For my whole life, when my father raised his voice, I got smaller. I explained. I apologized for things that weren't mine to apologize for. I had a lifetime of training that said respect means obedience and love means bleeding quietly, so the people who hurt you can keep calling it family. I felt my daughter shaking against my leg, and every single one of those rules just died. Gerald took a step toward me. You watch how you talk to your father. 10 years ago, that sentence would have worked. 5 years ago, even, I would have softened, lowered my eyes, found a way to make peace. But I looked at this man I had paid for, covered for, missed my daughter's concert for, and I felt absolutely nothing I was supposed to feel. This is my house, I said quietly. Those are my documents. That is my daughter. And you are not in charge here. Renee threw the folder onto the glass coffee table. Papers fanned out and slid. Your house. Your documents. Your daughter. You know that's always been your whole problem, Dana. Everything's yours. Because I worked for it. Gerald laughed, but the color had drained out around his mouth. You think a fancy job makes you untouchable? You think we didn't sacrifice for you? You made loans, I said, out of my guilt. And I paid every one of them. Until I finally learned the difference between being helped and being hunted. Renee's eyes flickered. She hadn't expected that. Neither of them had. Because for 2 decades I'd answered their cruelty with paragraphs. I'd defended my savings. I'd defended my schedule. I'd defended why I couldn't keep funding emergencies that were never emergencies. But standing between my daughter and the 2 people who'd taught me to fear their disappointment, I felt no need to defend a single thing. Then I noticed something on the table that made my stomach turn. My spare key, the one I kept in the back of the kitchen drawer. It was sitting right there next to Renee's bag. How did you get in? I asked. Gerald crossed his arms. Don't you start with me. How did you get into my locked house? Renee's lips pressed into a white line. I looked from her face to the key to her open bag, and the math finished itself. You took my spare. At Lily's birthday. You were in my kitchen getting waters. That is not the point, she snapped. It is now. Gerald slammed his hand flat on the coffee table so hard the glass jumped, and Lily flinched so violently against me that I felt it in my own chest. My arm came around her on pure instinct, and something in me, something I keep very carefully locked up even in the worst nights at work, went very, very cold. Just sign the papers, he growled. Renee's got a lender who needs collateral. My land's already tied up. You sign over the apartment share, just temporarily, and we fix all of it. Nobody has to know. Temporarily, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? Because there's a blank transfer form and a notary stamp in that bag, Dad, and neither of those things belongs to anyone who lives in this house. His eyes narrowed. Nobody forged anything, Renee said. Too fast. Way too fast. I turned my phone so they could both see the screen, the call still live, the little timer counting up, second after second. Police are already coming, I said. And for the first time, the room went truly silent. Then, faint but growing, sirens, cutting across the gray Portland afternoon, getting closer, and I watched my father's face transform in real time, from rage into pure calculation. Dana, he said, and his voice was suddenly warm, suddenly the dad from the county fair. Listen to me. When they get here, you tell them it was a misunderstanding. You tell them you came home tired and overreacted. We're family. You don't want a family thing to become a police thing. Renee stepped closer, and now she was soft too. Now her eyes were wet and pleading. Please, Dana, please. You don't understand what this is going to do to us. To Dad. He's 68. He can't. I almost asked what terrifying a 9-year-old was going to do to Lily, but I already knew the answer. They wouldn't care about that. They'd never once cared about a consequence until it landed on their own doorstep, and they weren't about to start now. You still think this is about what happens to you, I said. And honestly, if that had been you in that room, your father going soft and reasonable, your sister crying real-looking tears, every old instinct in your body screaming that maybe you should just smooth it over, keep the peace, protect the family name. I don't know what you would have done. I really don't. Because the pull to make it all quietly go away is enormous. It is the single strongest gravity I have ever felt. It took me 40 years, and my daughter's shaking hands to break free of it. The siren stopped right outside. The windows actually trembled, and Gerald moved, not toward the door, toward me. He reached for my wrist, I think to take the phone. I'll never know for sure, and I stepped back just as the front door opened behind him. Police. 2 officers came through, calm and enormous in the way that makes guilty people suddenly remember their manners. Everybody stay exactly where you are. Gerald let go of the space between us like it had burned him. I need to slow down here. because what happened next is the part I replay the most, and I want you to see all of it. Renee shoved my mother's pearls deeper into her bag. But one of the officers, younger, sharp-eyed, his name was Officer Price, saw her do it. I watched him see it. That one small motion was the first crack in everything they were about to try. Gerald lifted both hands in this wounded, fatherly gesture I'd seen my whole life. Officers, I'm so glad you're here. This is just a family disagreement, that's all. My daughter's a doctor. She works these awful long shifts. She's exhausted and she's gotten emotional. You know how it is. Emotional. I almost laughed out loud. That was always the word, wasn't it? The word men like him reach for the instant a woman stops doing what she's told. The second officer, a woman named Officer Hale, turned to me. Ma'am, are you the one who called? Yes, Dana Whitmore. This is my home. My father and my sister entered without permission while I was supposed to be at work. They searched my bedroom, took my late mother's jewelry, threatened my 9-year-old daughter, and tried to pressure me into signing over property. I held up the phone. The 911 call is still connected, and I recorded the last several minutes. That's a lie! Renee exploded. Lily pressed her wet face into my hip. I kept one hand flat between her shoulder blades and felt her breathing, too fast, like a small bird. Officer Hale asked Renee to set her bag on the floor. Renee refused. Hale asked again, slower. Renee's hands were shaking when she finally let it drop. And when Officer Price crouched down and opened that bag, the living room went silent in a way I have never heard before or since. The kind of silence that has weight. My mother's pearl necklace. 2 of her rings. My spare key. A folded blank transfer form. A notary stamp that belonged to no one in that house. And several pages with my name already typed onto the signature lines. Officer Price looked up. His jaw was tight. Whose documents are these? Renee looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at the floor. That was all the answer anyone in that room needed. They moved Lily and me toward the kitchen. Renee started to cry. But I knew that crying, I'd seen it my whole life. And it wasn't guilt. It was the very specific grief of being caught. Gerald tried a new mask entirely. I'm a grandfather, he said, soft and grave. I was only trying to protect my family from financial ruin. Surely you can understand that. Officer Hale didn't even blink. By threatening a child? You don't understand our situation. I understand what I heard on the call, she said. And I understand what's in that bag. Then Officer Price knelt down to Lily's level, gentle as anything, and asked if she was hurt. She shook her head. But then, in a tiny voice, she said the sentence that ended my father's entire performance. He said Mom would lose the house if I didn't tell him where the folder was. I watched it land. I watched it cross every adult face in that room. They handcuffed Gerald first. He fought it the only way he knew how, with words, not fists, and somehow that made him look smaller than I'd ever seen him. Dana, you are going to destroy this family. I looked at him as the cuffs clicked closed. No, I said. I'm protecting what's left of it. Renee screamed when they cuffed her, insisting the jewelry was family jewelry, the papers were just copies. Lily was being dramatic. But by then the neighbors had come out onto their porches. The woman across the street, Mrs. Okafor, who'd brought us a casserole the week my mother died, stood on her steps and watched my sister get walked to a patrol car with our mother's pearls sealed in a clear evidence bag. And when Gerald saw the neighbors, his face finally changed. Not into regret, into humiliation. And I've learned that for men like my father, humiliation cuts so much deeper than guilt ever could. I thought, as those patrol cars pulled away, that the worst was over. I was wrong. What they'd done inside my house that afternoon was only the surface. The real theft had started months before, and I was about to find out exactly how deep it went. That night, Lily slept in my bed with the hallway light on, and my hand wrapped around hers. Every time a car passed outside, her fingers tightened around mine. I have spent my entire career putting broken people back together, and I lay there in the dark, completely unable to stitch up the one wound that mattered, my daughter, half asleep, asking, Mom, is Grandpa gonna come back? I told her the truth, in the gentlest shape I could find. Not tonight, and not without the police knowing, and not without me standing in the way. She stared at the ceiling for a long time, then she asked, Did I do something wrong? That question hurt worse than anything Gerald said all afternoon. No, baby, no. The grown-ups did something wrong. You were so brave, but you should never, ever have been put in that room in the first place. She nodded. But children don't heal just because an adult finally says the right words. Her body still remembered being cornered. Her eyes still flicked toward the hallway, every time the old house creaked. If you have ever had to look a child in the eye and explain why someone who was supposed to love them chose not to, if you've ever had to be calm for a kid while your own heart was coming apart, then you know there's no medical training in the world that prepares you for it. You just hold their hand and lie still and hope your steadiness is contagious. By morning, I knew the house needed more than cleaning. It needed proof. It belonged to us again. I changed every lock. I canceled every spare key. I froze my credit, called my bank, and moved every physical document into a safe deposit box across town. I photographed every empty drawer, every scratch, every broken frame, every blank space where something had been taken. By noon, a detective named Marsh called and asked me to come to the station. "We found some things," she said. "Several things, actually. I already knew it would be bad. I didn't yet know it would be calculated." Renee's bag had held a fake notary stamp, blank transfer paperwork, and a printed copy of my hospital schedule. My schedule, not a guess. Not a lucky coincidence. Someone had known exactly which hours I'd be gone, down to the shift. Detective Marsh asked who had access to it, and I sat in that little gray room and watched the small moments of the last 2 months line up like instruments on a surgical tray, clean and sharp and ready. Renee texting me, all casual, "You still doing those brutal Tuesday doubles?" Gerald offering to pick Lily up from school to take some weight off you, then getting strangely angry when I said no thank you. The spare key, vanishing after the birthday party. Every little thing I'd waved off as annoying was, I realized, reconnaissance. That evening, my attorney came over. His name is Marcus, and he's been a friend since residency, and he doesn't soften things, which is exactly why I called him. He spread the police inventory across my kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. "Dana, this is not a messy family argument," he said. "This is attempted fraud, burglary, coercion, theft, and possibly identity crime. Do you understand that?" I sat very still. They said Renee needed collateral. That may be the motive. But there's more. He slid a printed valuation across the table. "Your apartment share. It's worth a great deal more now than it was when your mother left it to you." I knew the building had gone up. I did not know by how much. I looked at the number, and I went cold all over. 7 figures. Not cash in my pocket. Not something I could touch tomorrow. But enough equity to make desperate people very, very dangerous. "They weren't really after jewelry," Marcus said quietly. "The jewelry was a bonus they grabbed on the way through. What they came for was control. And here's what I've come to understand about people like my father and my sister. The thing that took me my whole life to see clearly. They had spent years counting on my guilt. It was the most reliable thing in their lives, more reliable than a job, more reliable than the truth. And the one thing they never planned for, the one variable they never imagined I'd use, was my documentation. Because documentation doesn't cry at Thanksgiving. It doesn't get manipulated. It doesn't soften when an old man calls you ungrateful. It just sits in a folder and waits for the right person to read it out loud. A few days later, Renee opened her second front. Not in my house this time. Online. She posted a long, tearful message about being betrayed by a selfish sister, about watching greed tear a family apart, about how some people forget who raised them the moment they start making doctor money. She wrote about debts and sacrifices. She never once mentioned Lily. She never mentioned the notary stamp. She never mentioned being arrested with our dead mother's pearls in her purse. Gerald called relatives from jail and told them I'd sicked the police on him simply because I hated being asked for help. My phone filled up. Some messages were cruel. Some were cautious. Some just asked, carefully, what had really happened. And for the first time in my life, I didn't answer with paragraphs. I sent one message to the family group chat. "I won't be discussing an active criminal case. For anyone repeating false claims, my attorney will respond. A child was threatened in my home. Police recovered evidence. That is all." And then I attached nothing. No recording, no photos, no emotional speech. Silence did what all my years of pleading never could. People started calling the county clerk. People started pulling up arrest records. People started noticing the holes in Renee's story were big enough to drive a truck through. Within 2 days, a cousin apologized. Then an aunt. Then a neighbor who'd heard Gerald's version at the hardware store showed up at my door with red eyes and a foil-covered dish. Renee deleted her post, but screenshots outlive lies, and Marcus had saved every single one. That's when the revenge, if you even want to call it that, stopped being emotional and became purely procedural. I want to be careful here, because I don't want you to think I went to court hungry for blood. I didn't. Preparing the case felt almost exactly like preparing for surgery, and that's the only way I knew how to survive it. You gather the imaging. You study the damage. You decide what can be repaired, and what has to be removed, before it poisons the rest of the body. Marcus built the case the way I build a trauma plan. First, the entry wound the break-in. Second, the internal bleeding, the threats against my child. Third, the hidden damage, the forged forms, the fake stamp, the printed schedule, the stolen key, the 7-figure motive underneath all of it. And then came the part that changed everything in me. Detective Marsh recovered messages between Gerald and Renee from the weeks before. I was only allowed to read a portion before trial, but it was enough to make my hands go numb on the kitchen table. Renee had written, "If Dana sees Dad upset, she'll just say no. But if Lily's scared, Dana folds. She always folds for the kid." And Gerald had written back, "Don't hurt the kid. Just make sure she understands this is all Dana's fault." I read that second line 3 times, "Don't hurt the kid," as if terror wasn't harm. As if making a 9-year-old believe her home could be ripped away from her was simply technique. As if there were some clean version of using a child as a crowbar. Marcus was watching my face. "Dana," he said, "this is why we do not settle this quietly." "I wasn't planning to," I whispered. "This is the thing this whole nightmare taught me. And it's the thing I'd give to you if I could only give you one. The mistake most people make, the mistake I made for 40 years, is believing that keeping the peace and being safe are the same thing. They are not. They are often opposites. Every time I smoothed things over for my father, every time I quietly paid and quietly forgave and quietly protected his pride, I wasn't buying peace. I was buying him another year of believing he was untouchable. I made him immune. And immunity, in people who already feel entitled to your life, is the most dangerous thing you can hand them. Renee's life started coming apart before we ever reached a courtroom. She'd been working part-time for a property management company and trying to get her real estate license. The day her employer learned she'd been arrested with forged property transfer paperwork and a stolen key, they let her go. Gerald's friends from church stopped repeating his version once the local paper ran the arrest summary. The man who'd spent years calling me ungrateful suddenly couldn't get a cup of coffee at his usual diner without the room going quiet. I did not celebrate any of it, but I also did not rescue him from it. And that right there was the whole difference between the old me and the new one. Old Dana would have called around, explained, softened the story, protected his pride, because he's still your father. New Dana looked at Lily sleeping with a nightlight again, at 9 years old, and understood that protecting one grown man's reputation had already cost my child her sense of safety. I wasn't willing to make that trade anymore. So I let the truth do what the truth does when you finally stop burying it. The night before the hearing, I found Lily at the kitchen table drawing a picture of our house. She'd drawn the front door, the big fir tree out front, my bedroom window, and 2 police cars parked at the curb. But she'd also drawn a figure standing in front of the door, between the house and everyone else. "Is that me?" I asked. She nodded without looking up. "You were scared too. But you stayed." I sat down next to her. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, Lily. It means you stay even when you are." She thought about that for a while, the way kids do. Then she asked, "Does being a family mean you have to forgive people?" I answered very carefully, because I knew she'd carry whatever I said for the rest of her life. Forgiveness is your own private business. You can forgive someone someday if you want to. But safety isn't optional, and it isn't the same thing as forgiveness. You can forgive a person completely and still never, ever let them back through your door. That became the sentence I carried up the courthouse steps. Not anger, not revenge for its own sake. Safety, boundaries, consequences. Although I'll be honest with you, consequences can look an awful lot like revenge to people who spent their whole lives believing the rules would never once apply to them. The courtroom was smaller than I'd pictured, and colder. Gerald sat beside a public defender in the same gray jacket he wore to funerals, as if this were another tragedy happening to him rather than a disaster he had built with his own 2 hands. Renee sat 2 seats down, eyes red, hair perfect, her face arranged into wounded innocence. When she finally looked at me, she looked away first. And that told me everything. She wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of what I could prove. The prosecutor opened with the 911 call. My own whisper filled that cold room. My father and sister broke into my house. They're threatening my 9-year-old. And then, underneath my voice, Gerald's sharp and ugly, demanding the blue folder. Renee stared at the table. Gerald closed his eyes. Then the hallway camera footage clear enough to show Renee walking into my bedroom in gloves she would later claim were for cleaning. Then the photographs. The empty drawers. The pearls in her bag. The fake stamp. The transfer forms with my name already typed in. And when Detective Marsh read the text message aloud, "If Lily's scared," Dana Folds, the entire room went still. I didn't look at my sister. I looked at the judge. I needed her to understand that this was not a family squabble that got out of hand. This was a child used as a lever. When it was my turn, I kept my voice steady. I spoke like a mother, but I also spoke the way I give a report in the trauma bay. What I saw, what I heard, what I did, why I did it. Gerald's attorney suggested I might have misread the whole situation, being so exhausted after a long shift. I looked right at him and said, "I've worked 20-hour shifts and never once confused a family visit with a burglary." A few people in the gallery shifted in their seats. He moved on. Renee cried through her statement. She said she'd been overwhelmed, terrified of her debt, manipulated by their father, that she'd never meant to hurt Lily. Gerald blamed family pressure and my refusal to communicate. And here is what struck me. Sitting there listening, neither one of them ever said we were wrong to frighten a child. Neither said we were wrong to steal. Neither said we were wrong to believe Dana's life belonged to us. That absence sat in the room like a third defendant. The judge noticed it too. I watched her notice. Marcus sat behind me with one hand resting on the folder that held years of ignored warnings, bank transfers I'd made to them, messages where they'd demanded money, screenshots of Renee's lies, camera logs, repair estimates, the therapist's recommendations, my mother's estate documents, proving in plain black ink that they had no claim to a single thing they'd tried to take. For years they'd treated paperwork like a weapon they could turn on me. Now paperwork was the wall they could not climb. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but every word landed like a stone. She said the court recognized real financial stress, but that desperation does not create ownership over another person's home, or documents, or child. She said that family status did not lessen the seriousness of coercion, it deepened the betrayal of trust. Then came the consequences. Gerald pleaded to felony burglary, attempted extortion, and child endangerment. 18 months in county custody, followed by probation, mandatory counseling, restitution, and a 5-year no-contact order protecting Lily and me. Renee pleaded to burglary, theft, attempted fraud, and violating her release conditions. She got a split-sentence jail time, then home confinement, probation, restitution, and a permanent mark on the very background check she'd been counting on to launch her real estate career. The forged forms were voided. My apartment share was placed under additional legal protection. The court ordered restitution for the repairs, the legal costs, Lily's therapy, and the appraised value of everything they'd damaged and stolen. And in the civil case Marcus filed afterward, he secured a judgment placing liens against my father's land and my sister's remaining assets until every dollar was repaid. That was the part they never saw coming. They had broken into my house hunting for documents that would let them take from me. Instead, the documents I had quietly kept for years took from them their excuses, their access, their reputations, and a very large piece of their financial future. When Gerald heard the restitution figure, his shoulders dropped like someone had cut the strings holding him up. Renee turned around once, scanning the gallery, looking for somebody to pity her. Almost everyone looked away, and that silence was its own kind of verdict. It was the sound of a whole room finally understanding that being family doesn't automatically make a person safe, and being exposed doesn't make a person a victim. Outside on the courthouse steps, an aunt who'd sent me one of the cruelest messages came up to me with tears in her eyes. "Dana? I didn't know," she said. "I wanted to say you didn't ask. Instead I just said, well, now you do." Lily and I walked out into a thin, cold Portland sunlight. She held my hand, but this time she didn't hide behind me. "Can they come to our house again?" she asked. "No," I said. "Not legally, not safely, not while I'm breathing." She thought about it, the way she thinks about everything. "Are we still a family?" I looked down at her, and then out at the wide gray sky stretching over the city, and I realized the answer was so much simpler than all the pain had made it seem. "Yes," I said. "You and me, and the people who love us without ever trying to own us." In the months that came after, our home got quiet again. But it was a different quiet than before. Not the old quiet where I swallowed my anger to keep an uneasy peace. A stronger quiet. Locks changed. Cameras up. Papers protected. Therapy appointments kept. Boundaries that actually held. I replaced the broken frame in my bedroom. I did not replace the illusion that my father and sister could be trusted. I drove Lily to school. I went back to the trauma bay. I cooked simple dinners and let our lives become ordinary again, and I want to tell you ordinary felt like winning the lottery. Some relatives eventually apologized. Some just disappeared, and I let them. Renee sent a single letter through her lawyer, not to apologize, but to ask if I'd consider lowering the restitution, because, she wrote, starting over is hard. Marcus answered with one line. Dr. Whitmore declines. Gerald never apologized at all. I stopped waiting for it. And that, it turned out, was its own kind of freedom. I never taught my daughter that revenge means cruelty. I taught her that consequences are simply what happens when the truth finally gets a few witnesses. My father and sister came to regret what they did, but not because I screamed louder than them. They regretted it because I finally stopped being the person who cleaned up their messes. I stopped mistaking blood for permission. I stopped offering my child's safety as the entry fee for family loyalty. So before I go, I want to ask you something, and I really do want you to answer. If it had been you standing in your own living room, watching the people who raised you use your child as leverage, what would you have chosen? Blood or peace? Comment 1 if you think I did the right thing. Comment 2 if you think I went too far. Comment 3 if you honestly don't know what you would have done, because that's an honest answer too, and I respect it more than you know. And tell me, where in the world are you watching this from? And what time is it where you are right now? I'm always amazed how far these stories travel, and if you've ever lived through something like this, if you've ever had to choose safety over the people who were supposed to keep you safe, tell me in the comments. You are not alone in it. I promise you that. If this story moved you, or made you think of someone, please take 1 second to subscribe. It's just me telling these stories, and every single subscriber genuinely helps me keep telling them. I'd love to have you here for the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Portland to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.